I didn't lose my temper when I found the tube of lubricant hidden under the passenger seat of my vintage Mustang. I didn't confront my wife. I didn't even raise my voice. I simply walked to my workbench, grabbed a tube of industrial-grade epoxy, and made a little switch. What happened next didn't just wake up the neighbors. It brought the fire department, the police, and eventually, the sweet taste of justice to an old man everyone thought was a fool. If you think cheaters deserve what they get, hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Let me know in the comments where you are listening from, and let me tell you how I turned a heartbreaking betrayal into the stickiest revenge in the history of Lake Forest. My name is Harrison Burke. I am 72 years old, and for 40 years I was the general contractor who built half the luxury homes in this town. I know how things are put together. I know that a structure is only as good as its foundation. And I know that once a crack starts in the concrete, you have to fix it immediately, or the whole house comes down. But on that Tuesday afternoon, standing in my garage, I wasn't looking at a cracked foundation. I was looking at a smudge of lipstick on the leather upholstery of my 1969 Mustang Boss 429. This car is not just a vehicle to me, it is a time capsule. It is the one thing I bought for myself after my first big contract in 1985. Nobody drives this car but me. Nobody even breathes on it without my permission. That rule was absolute, or at least I thought it was. I was down on my knees polishing the chrome bumper with a microfiber cloth, the smell of carnauba wax filling the air. It is my meditation. It is where I find peace away from the noise of a world that thinks men like me are obsolete. I opened the passenger door to wipe down the dashboard, and that is when I saw it. The passenger seat was slid all the way back. I am 6 feet tall, but I don't slide the seat back that far. My wife Monica is 5'4". If she sat there, she would need the seat forward. So who was sitting in my car with enough legroom for a giant? I felt a cold knot tighten in my stomach. It wasn't just the seat position. It was the smell. My car usually smells like old leather and gasoline. Today it smelled like cheap vanilla body spray and sweat. I reached under the seat, my calloused fingers brushing against the carpet, searching for whatever trash had been left behind. I expected a wrapper, maybe a receipt. What I pulled out was a small black velvet drawstring bag. My heart hammered against my ribs, a rhythm I hadn't felt since I was roofing houses in the summer heat of my 20s. I opened the bag. Inside there was a half-empty tube of strawberry-flavored lubricant, a strip of unopened condoms, and a pair of handcuffs with pink fur on them. I sat there on the cold concrete floor of my garage holding these vulgar objects in my hands. Hands that have poured cement-framed walls and signed payroll checks for hundreds of men. I looked at the reflection of my face in the polished door of the Mustang. Gray hair, deep lines etched around my eyes, a face that had seen enough of life to know when it was being mocked. Monica. My wife of 10 years. The woman I had pulled out of debt, the woman I had given a life of leisure, the woman who swore she was going to a charity luncheon at the country club. She hadn't taken her SUV. She had taken my Mustang. And she hadn't gone to lunch. You don't bring strawberry lubricant to a charity lunch unless the charity is servicing the entire board of directors. The rage didn't come like a fire. It came like ice. It froze my blood. I looked at the house. Through the window, I could see the kitchen where Monica would be coming home in a few hours, probably feigning exhaustion from her charitable works. She thought I was just an old ATM machine. She thought I was blind, or maybe she just didn't care enough to hide her tracks anymore. That is the thing about arrogance. It makes people sloppy. She left her dirty little kit in my sanctuary, assuming I wouldn't clean the car until the weekend. I stood up, my knee popping slightly. I walked over to my workbench. This garage is organized with the precision of a surgical theater. Every wrench, every hammer, every screw has a place. I looked at the shelf labeled adhesives. I have glues that can bond wood to brick. I have sealants that can stop a high-pressure leak. And right there in the back, I had a fresh supply of 2-part epoxy resin, the kind used for anchoring steel bolts into concrete. The label said it sets in 5 minutes and cures to full strength in an hour. Once it hardens, you need an angle grinder to remove it. It is permanent, just like marriage vows are supposed to be. I took the tube of strawberry lubricant over to the utility sink. I squeezed every drop of that slime down the drain, watching it disappear. I washed the tube out with hot water and acetone, drying it thoroughly with compressed air. I needed it to be dry. Epoxy hates moisture. Then I took 2 paper cups and mixed the resin in the hardener. I stirred it slowly with a wooden stick. The chemical smell was sharp, biting, cleaner than the smell of the vanilla perfume lingering in my car. It was a gray, thick paste. With the steady hand of a man who has applied miles of caulk and grout, I carefully injected the mixed epoxy back into the lubricant tube. It was a perfect fit. I wiped the nozzle clean. I capped it. It looked exactly as it had 5 minutes ago. Innocent. Inviting. Deadly. I placed the tube back into the black velvet bag. I put the condoms and the handcuffs back in. I slid the bag back under the passenger seat of the Mustang exactly where I found it. I moved the seat back to the position the stranger had left it in. I wiped my fingerprints off the door handle. I went back to polishing the bumper. My reflection looked different now. The sadness was gone. In its place was the cold, hard look of a man who is about to demolition a condemned building. I knew Monica. I knew her patterns. If she left this bag here, it meant she planned to use it again. Soon. Maybe tonight. She often complained that the guest house in our backyard was too stuffy and needed airing out. I had a feeling she would be doing some airing out tonight. I checked my watch. It was 4 in the afternoon. Monica would be home at 5. I had an hour to shower change into my comfortable sweater and pour myself a glass of scotch. I needed to be sitting in my leather armchair reading the newspaper, looking like the clueless, loving, retired husband she thought she had fooled. I wasn't just a husband anymore. I was a contractor who had just laid a trap, and I was going to wait for the cement to dry. They wanted to be together. They wanted a connection. Well, I was going to give them a bond that even God himself couldn't break apart. I sat in my leather armchair, a glass of scotch, resting on the side table, watching the digital numbers on the cable box flip to 5 o'clock. Right on schedule, the front door opened, and the clicking of high heels echoed across the hardwood floor. Monica breezed into the living room, a whirlwind of expensive perfume and frantic energy. She was wearing a red silk dress that hugged her figure in a way that was entirely inappropriate for a charity committee meeting, unless the committee was meeting in a nightclub. Her hair was perfectly coiffed, her makeup flawless, and she was already talking before she even looked at me. "Harrison, darling. I am so sorry I'm running late," she said, dropping her keys on the console table with a clatter. The traffic coming back from the salon was absolute murder. I barely had time to get ready. She finally turned to me, flashing a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. It was the same smile she used on bank tellers and waiters, a practiced expression of charm that masked a profound indifference. I took a slow sip of my scotch, letting the burn settle in my chest. "You look wonderful, Monica," I said, keeping my voice steady. "A bit dressed up for a budget meeting, isn't it?" She waved a dismissive hand, her diamond bracelet catching the light. "Oh, you know how these women are, Harrison. If you don't dress to kill, they eat you alive. It is all about presentation." She walked over to where I was sitting and leaned down to give me a peck on the cheek. As she got close, she wrinkled her nose slightly, pulling back just an inch. "Harrison, have you been in the garage all day? You smell like old grease and gasoline. It is really quite pungent." I looked at my hands resting on the armrests. They were scrubbed clean, but the scent of the workshop never truly leaves a man who works with his hands. It is the smell of honest labor, the smell of the work that paid for the silk dress she was wearing and the diamonds on her wrist. I am sorry, dear, I said, forcing a tone of apology. I was just giving the Mustang a little polish. Wanted her to look good if you decide to take her out again. Monica stiffened. Just for a split second, a flicker of panic crossed her face, but she smoothed it over instantly. Oh, I won't be taking the Mustang tonight. I think I will just walk over to the guest house. The committee decided to meet there. It is more private, and we don't want to disturb you with all our chatter. She turned away, moving towards the kitchen to grab a bottle of wine. I watched her go, marveling at the ease with which she lied. The guest house. My guest house. A beautiful little cottage I had built for my mother in her final years, now being repurposed as a love nest for my wife and her tennis instructor. It was almost impressive how bold she was. She was going to cheat on me right in my own backyard, confident that the old man in the main house would be asleep by 9, deaf to the world. She came back with a bottle of my best Cabernet already uncorked. Well, I better get going, she said, checking her reflection in the hallway mirror. Don't wait up for me. We might be late going over the gala details. I stood up slowly, groaning a little for effect, playing the part of the weary senior citizen. Wait a minute, Monica, I said, shuffling towards the kitchen counter. You forgot something. She stopped, her hand on the doorknob. What? I pointed to the black velvet bag sitting on the counter. I had brought it inside and left it there right next to the fruit bowl. You left your yoga bag in the car, I said innocently. I brought it in for you. I figured if you girls are going to be doing some stretches or meditation after the meeting, you might need your equipment. Monica stared at the bag. For a moment, the room was so quiet I could hear the hum of the refrigerator. Her eyes darted from the bag to me, searching for any sign that I knew what was inside. But I just stood there, smiling my goofy, oblivious husband smile. Oh, she stammered, her voice rising an octave. Right. Yes. Thank you, Harrison. That was very thoughtful of you. She walked back, snatched the bag off the counter, and shoved it quickly into her oversized purse. You are sweet. Really? She leaned in and kissed me on the lips this time. It was cold, quick, and tasted of expensive lipstick and deceit. It was the kiss of a woman who thought she had won, a woman who looked at her husband and saw nothing but a hurdle she had successfully cleared. Good night, Harrison, she said, her confidence restored. Get some rest. You look tired. I watched her walk out the back door, heading across the manicured lawn towards the guest house. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the grass. I saw the lights in the guest house flicker on. I saw a silhouette move past the window. Brett was already there. He must have parked down the street and hopped the fence just like a rat sneaking into a pantry. I locked the back door. Then I locked the front door. I turned off the lights in the kitchen and the living room, leaving the house in darkness. I went back to my armchair and sat down. I didn't turn on the TV. I didn't pick up my book. I just sat there in the dark, sipping my scotch and checking my watch. 6:30. The epoxy takes 5 minutes to set once mixed, but it needs warmth and pressure to really bond effectively. They would provide the warmth. And I had a feeling the pressure would take care of itself. I wasn't tired. I was wide awake. I felt a strange calm settling over me, the kind of calm you feel when the blueprints are drawn, the permits are signed, and the demolition crew is ready to swing the wrecking ball. I poured myself another finger of scotch. The bottle was almost empty, but that was fine. I had plenty of time. Tonight wasn't about sleeping. Tonight was about listening. I swirled the amber liquid in the glass, watching the moonlight filter through the blinds. They thought they were in paradise out there in that guest house. They didn't know they were actually in a holding cell, and the warden was sitting right here waiting for the inevitable call that would shatter their little world. I took a sip, closed my eyes, and waited for the show to begin. The grandfather clock in the hallway chimed twice, the deep resonant sound, marking 2 in the morning. I was still in my armchair, the glass of scotch, now empty, warmed by the heat of my hand. The house was silent, that heavy, thick silence that settles over the suburbs when the televisions are off and the decent people are asleep. I was just about to wonder if maybe the chemical mixture had failed, or if perhaps they had decided to just talk when it happened. It started as a low, guttural moan, the kind of sound an animal makes when it is caught in a steel trap. Then it escalated rapidly into a high-pitched shriek that sliced through the night air like a circular saw hitting a nail. It wasn't a scream of pleasure. I have been married long enough to know the difference, though Monica rarely expressed much enthusiasm with me. No, this was a scream of pure, unadulterated terror. It was followed immediately by a man's voice shouting in panic, a string of profanities that echoed off the siding of the main house. I didn't jump. I didn't run to the window. I simply set my glass down on the coaster and stood up, smoothing the wrinkles in my sweater. I walked calmly to the back window that overlooks the yard. The guest house was ablaze with light. Shadows were thrashing frantically against the blinds. It looked like a puppet show gone horribly wrong. Then came the sound of something heavy crashing to the floor, probably a lamp, or a side table, followed by more screaming. This time Monica was yelling for help. She was screaming for God. She was screaming for 911. I watched as the lights in the neighboring houses began to flick on one by one. Mrs. Higgins next door, a woman who sleeps with one eye open and a pair of binoculars on her nightstand, was the first to appear on her porch. Then Mr. Henderson across the street. The quiet sanctity of Lake Forest had been breached. I waited. I knew Monica. In a crisis, she doesn't call me. She calls the authorities because she thinks the world exists to serve her. 3 minutes later, the wail of sirens pierced the distance, growing louder and more urgent. First came the police cruiser tearing into the driveway, with lights flashing, painting my living room walls in strobing blue and red. 2 officers jumped out, hands on their holsters, running towards the guest house. They must have thought someone was being murdered. In a way, a reputation was certainly dying tonight. I decided it was time to make my appearance. I put on my bathrobe, tying the sash tightly, and stepped out onto the back porch. The cool night air hit my face. The officers were banging on the guest house door. "Police, open up," one of them shouted. "We can't." A male voice sobbed from inside. It was Brett. He sounded like a child. "We can't open the door. We can't move. Help us." The officer kicked the door. It flew open. The 2 policemen rushed inside, guns drawn. There was a moment of silence, a pause that lasted maybe 5 seconds. Then I heard one of the officers say, "Oh my God," followed by the other one choking back a sound that was suspiciously like laughter. They holstered their weapons immediately. One of them spoke into his radio, his voice cracking. "Dispatch, we need an ambulance. And, you better send the fire department too. We have a situation here that requires extraction tools." Extraction tools. I almost smiled. That is the thing about industrial epoxy. It doesn't care about dignity. It doesn't care about social standing. It just bonds. Soon the driveway was a parking lot of emergency vehicles. The ambulance arrived, followed by the massive red fire truck from Station 4. I knew the fire chief, Jerry. We played poker on Thursdays. I watched Jerry jump out of the truck looking serious, carrying a heavy tool bag. He ran into the guest house. By now, half the neighborhood was standing on the sidewalk or peering over the hedges. The show was free and nobody wanted to miss it. I walked down the steps, playing the part of the confused, awakened husband. I approached the young police officer standing guard by the door. "Officer, what is happening? Is my wife all right?" The officer looked at me, his face turning a deep shade of crimson. He couldn't make eye contact. "Mr. Burke, your wife is... She is alive. She is physically stable. But there has been an accident. A medical accident. We are trying to figure out the best way to transport them." "Them," I asked, feigning ignorance. Who is them?" Before he could answer, a commotion erupted from the doorway. It took 4 men to bring them out. 2 paramedics and 2 firefighters were struggling with the stretcher. They had covered the victims with a large yellow thermal blanket, but the shape underneath was unmistakable. It wasn't one person. It was a 2-headed beast, a grotesque lump of humanity writhing and cursing. Monica's head was visible at one end, her mascara running down her face in black rivers, her eyes wild with humiliation and pain. Brett was hidden under the sheet, but his legs were sticking out at an awkward angle, shuffling to keep up with the movement of the stretcher. They were fused. The epoxy had set, and it had set hard. They couldn't separate. They couldn't even put clothes on. The paramedics had to coordinate their steps, shouting instructions like pivot left and watch the doorframe. It was a logistical nightmare. They looked like a pair of conjoined twins who hated each other, forced to share a single body. Monica saw me standing there in my bathrobe. "Harrison," she screamed, her voice cracking. "Harrison, do something. Sue them. Sue the company. Get this off me. It burns. It burns." I stepped closer, looking at the fire chief, Jerry. Jerry wiped sweat from his forehead. "Harrison, I have seen cars wrapped around telephone poles, and I have seen cats stuck in ventilation shafts. But I have never seen anything like this. We can't separate them here. The solvent required is too dangerous to use outside a hospital. We have to take them both, together." The neighbors were gasping. Phones were out recording the spectacle. The flashing lights illuminated the scene in harsh bursts. I looked at Monica, then I looked at the lump that was Brett. I leaned in close, just enough for her to hear me over the idling diesel engines of the fire truck. "I told you to be careful with that yoga equipment, Monica," I said softly. "You know how important form is. If you rush things, you get stuck in a bad position." She stared at me, her eyes widening. For the first time, the realization hit her. She saw the lack of surprise on my face. She saw the cold, hard calculation in my eyes. She opened her mouth to say something to accuse me, but the paramedics shoved the stretcher into the back of the ambulance. "Ow, watch it, you idiot," Brett yelled from under the sheet. "You are pulling my skin." "Shut up, Brett," Monica shrieked. "Just shut up!" The doors of the ambulance slammed shut, sealing the unhappy couple inside their rolling prison. The siren wailed again, and the vehicle sped off towards the hospital, followed by the police cruiser. The fire truck lingered for a moment. Jerry walked over to me, shaking his head. "I don't know what they were using in there, Harrison," Jerry said, clapping a hand on my shoulder. "But that bond is stronger than the steel frame of this truck. Whatever it is not coming off without a layer of skin coming with it. You might want to call a lawyer, buddy. This is going to be a mess." I watched the taillights disappear around the corner. The neighbors were starting to disperse, whispering excitedly, already composing the text messages that would spread through the town like wildfire by sunrise. I stood alone in the driveway, the smell of exhaust fumes and drama hanging in the air. I turned back to the house. I needed to clean up the guest house before the sun came up. Not to hide evidence, of course. The police had already seen everything. But because I am a tidy man. I like order, and tonight order had been restored in the most chaotic way possible. As I walked back inside, I picked up the empty glass from the table. I held it up to the light. Structural integrity is everything. When you apply the right amount of pressure to the right materials, you get a bond that lasts a lifetime, or at least long enough to ruin one. I poured myself one last splash of scotch. To the happy couple, I whispered to the empty room. May they stick together through thick and thin, mostly thick. The sun came up over Lake Forest like a judge entering a courtroom, stern and unforgiving. I was sitting at my kitchen table drinking black coffee from a chipped mug that I have had since 1990. The house was quiet, but it wasn't a peaceful silence. It was the heavy, suffocating stillness that comes right before a structural collapse. I knew they were coming back. You don't send 2 people to the hospital fused together like a modern art sculpture without the law returning to ask some very pointed questions. At 8 in the morning, the doorbell rang. It wasn't the polite chime of a neighbor borrowing sugar. It was a firm, authoritative press that demanded an answer. I walked to the door, my spine straight. I opened it to find 2 detectives standing on my porch. One looked tired with bags under his eyes that matched his cheap gray suit. The other was younger, sharper, looking at me like I was a cracked support beam that needed to be condemned. Mr. Burke, the older detective said, flashing a badge that caught the morning light. I am Detective Miller. This is Detective Ramirez. We need you to come with us. I took a sip of my coffee, staying calm. Is this about the accident last night, Detective? I hope my wife is recovering well. Miller didn't smile. He stepped into the foyer without asking for permission, forcing me to back up. Mrs. Burke is currently in surgery. Mr. Burke, the doctors are attempting to separate her from Mr. Brett without causing permanent nerve damage. It is a delicate procedure, but we are not here to give you a medical update. We are here because your wife made a statement about 20 minutes ago, right before they put her under anesthesia. I raised an eyebrow. Oh. And what did Monica have to say? Ramirez spoke up, his voice clipped and aggressive. She says you did this on purpose. She says you have been exhibiting signs of paranoia and aggression for months. She told us you are losing your grip on reality, that you are a jealous, senile old man who couldn't handle the fact that she has needs you can't meet. She claims you swapped the contents of that bottle intentionally to cause great bodily harm. I looked at Ramirez. He was trying to provoke me. He wanted the angry old man to snap. I didn't give him the satisfaction. That is a very serious accusation, I said quietly. My wife is in a lot of pain and she is embarrassed. People say all sorts of things when they are humiliated. I used that glue to repair a seal on the car door earlier yesterday. I must have left it on the workbench. If she took it by mistake, that is a tragedy, but it is not a crime. Miller shook his head, pulling a pair of handcuffs from his belt. The metal jingled a sound that cut through the air sharper than a knife. We found the tube, Mr. Burke. It wasn't on the workbench. It was in a velvet bag under the seat. And the lab boys are already looking at it. But here is the kicker. Monica told us you gave her that bag. She said you specifically reminded her to take it. She said you smiled when you handed it to her. That is premeditation. That is aggravated battery. And depending on how this surgery goes, it might be attempted mayhem. I felt a cold weight settle in my stomach. Monica. Even in her agony, she was calculating. She was spinning the narrative. She was painting me as the villain, the broken-down relic who lashed out at the vibrant, beautiful victim. She was using my age against me, weaponizing the very years I spent working to provide for her. She knew exactly what to say to make herself look like the damsel in distress, even though she was the one caught cheating in my backyard. Turn around, Mr. Burke, Miller said. You are under arrest. I set my coffee mug down on the console table. I turned around slowly. I felt his rough hands grab my wrists, pulling them behind my back. The steel cuffs bit into my skin, cold and unyielding. I have worked with steel my whole life. I have bent it, welded it, used it to hold up skyscrapers. I never thought I would feel it locking away my freedom in my own hallway. As they marched me out the front door, the morning air hit my face. The neighborhood was awake now, and they were watching. Mrs. Higgins was standing by her hedges, her hand over her mouth. Mr. Henderson was washing his car, but he stopped the hose dripping water onto his driveway as he stared. I saw the mailman pause his truck. For 40 years, I was Harrison Burke, the man who built the library downtown, the man who sponsored the Little League team, the man who plowed his neighbors' driveways when the snow got too deep. I was a pillar of this community. Now I was being led down my front walk like a common criminal, my head held high, but my wrists shackled. I could see the judgment in their eyes. They didn't see the betrayal I had suffered. They didn't see the years of emotional abuse, the financial draining, the disrespect. They only saw the police car and the old man who had finally snapped. I didn't look down. I looked straight at Mrs. Higgins. She turned away, unable to meet my gaze. That is how it works in the suburbs. You are a hero until you are an inconvenience, and then you are a pariah. Miller pushed my head down as he guided me into the back of the cruiser. "Watch your head," he grunted. The back seat smelled of stale sweat and disinfectant. The hard plastic seat was uncomfortable. As the door slammed shut, sealing me in, I looked back at my house. My beautiful brick colonial with the slate roof I installed myself. It looked different now. It didn't look like a home. It looked like a crime scene. Miller got in the driver's seat and started the engine. Ramirez turned to look at me through the wire mesh divider. "You know, Mr. Burke," Ramirez said, a smirk playing on his lips. "Your wife said something else. She said you are pathetic. She said she was going to leave you anyway after she cashed out the equity in the house. Looks like you just sped up the process, but now you are going to prison instead of a retirement home." I didn't respond. I just stared out the window as the car pulled away. Monica had played her hand. She had turned the law against me. She thought she had won. She thought that by putting me in this car, she had stripped me of my power. But she was forgetting one thing. A contractor always reads the fine print. And I knew something she didn't. I knew that the foundation she was standing on was built on lies, and I had just handed the police the sledgehammer, even if they didn't know how to swing it yet. The ride to the station was long. I watched the familiar streets roll by the trees I had seen planted as saplings, now towering oaks. My wrists ached, but my mind was clear. I wasn't afraid. Fear is for people who don't have a plan. I had a plan. It was a dangerous plan. A plan that relied on the arrogance of my enemies, but it was the only structural support I had left. Let them arrest me. Let them drag my name through the mud. The deeper they dug, the more dirt they were going to find, and not all of it belonged to me. I closed my eyes and listened to the hum of the tires on the asphalt, counting the seconds, waiting for the next phase of demolition to begin. The interrogation room was exactly as I had seen in movies, but colder. The air conditioning was humming at a frequency that drilled right into my temples, and the metal table bolted to the floor was freezing under my forearms. They had taken my belt and my shoelaces, standard procedure, they said, but it felt like a calculated attempt to strip away the last shreds of my dignity. I sat there staring at the two-way mirror, wondering if Detective Miller was on the other side drinking coffee and laughing at the old contractor who finally cracked. Miller walked in a few minutes later, dropping a thick file on the table with a heavy thud. He didn't sit down. He paced around the room, maximizing the intimidation factor. He thought he was hunting a wolf, but he didn't realize he was just barking at a very patient bear. "So let us go over this one more time," Mr. Burke, Miller said, leaning over me, his breath smelling of stale tobacco. "You are telling me that you, a man who has built multi-million-dollar estates, a man known for his meticulous attention to detail, just happened to store industrial-grade epoxy in a sexual lubricant bottle. You expect a jury to believe that was an accident." I looked up at him, keeping my eyes slightly wide, feigning that look of confusion I had seen so many of my elderly friends adopt when they wanted to get out of a speeding ticket. "Detective, I have a garage full of solvents and chemicals. I buy in bulk, 50-gallon drums sometimes. Do you know how hard it is to apply a precision bead of epoxy from a gallon tub? I needed a small dispenser. I needed something with a squeeze top. I saw an empty bottle in the recycling bin. I washed it out. I used it. I am a child of the Depression-era mentality, detective. We don't throw things away. We repurpose them." Miller slammed his hand on the table. "Bullshit. You put it in a velvet bag. You put it under the seat. That is a trap, Harrison. That is a hunting blind. You knew she was going to use it." I was about to respond, to give him my rehearsed line about cleaning the car interior, when the heavy steel door buzzed and swung open. A voice sliced through the tension like a diamond cutter through glass. Detective Miller, if you ask my client one more question without me present, I will have your badge served to me on a platter for lunch, and I will make sure the city pays for the garnish. I didn't need to turn around to know who it was. Arthur Caldwell. We had been friends for 30 years. I built his lake house. He handled my contracts. Arthur was 70 years old too, but while I had aged like a brick wall, Arthur had aged like a fine poisonous wine. He walked in wearing a three-piece Italian suit that cost more than Miller's car, carrying a leather briefcase that probably held more secrets than the Vatican. Miller straightened up, looking annoyed but clearly outgunned. "Mr. Caldwell, you got here fast." "I smell blood in the water," Arthur said, placing his briefcase on the table and sitting down next to me. He didn't even look at me. He just stared at Miller. "You are holding a 72-year-old man with a heart condition in a freezing room without legal counsel. Unless you are charging him right now, I suggest you step out and let me speak to my client. Or are we going to discuss the violation of his civil rights instead?" Miller ground his teeth. "We have probable cause. The wife is in surgery right now, getting separated from her lover. It is a circus out there." "Then let the clowns handle it," Arthur snapped. "Step out." Miller glared at me one last time, pointing a finger. "Don't get comfortable, Burke." Then he turned and walked out the door, clicking shut behind him. The silence that followed was heavy. Arthur waited a full minute, checking his watch, ensuring the recording devices were off, or that we had enough privacy to speak in hushed tones. Then he turned to me. The warmth was gone from his eyes. He looked at me with the cold, analytical gaze of a man who dissects disasters for a living. "Harrison, you crazy son of a bitch," Arthur whispered. I leaned back, rubbing my wrists. "It is good to see you too, Arthur." "Don't give me that," he hissed. "I just came from the hospital. I have friends on the board. They told me what is happening in that operating room. It is a nightmare. They have to graft skin Harrison. They are literally cutting them apart. If Monica decides to press charges, and she will, you are looking at aggravated battery mayhem and possibly attempted murder depending on what toxins are in that glue. You are looking at 10 years, minimum. You will die in prison." I stayed silent. I knew the stakes. That is why I had called him. Arthur leaned in closer. "Listen to me very carefully. The difference between you dying in a cell and you dying in your bed comes down to one word: intent. If you did this to teach her a lesson, you are finished. The law doesn't care that she was cheating. The law cares that you set a booby trap. A trap implies malice. Malice implies prison." I looked Arthur in the eye. I needed him to believe me. Or at least I needed him to believe that the lie was strong enough to stand on. "Arthur," I said, my voice shaking just a little, the perfect amount of tremor. "I didn't set a trap. I was fixing the weather stripping on the passenger door. You know that car? The rubber seal was coming loose. I needed a strong adhesive. The big tube was clogged. I transferred the epoxy to the small bottle because it had a fine tip nozzle. It was perfect for the job." Arthur narrowed his eyes. "And the bag, the condoms, the handcuffs." I sighed, looking down at the table. "I found those in the car a week ago." I was disgusted. I put the glue bottle in the bag to hide it. I didn't want to look at it. I threw it under the seat and forgot about it. I am getting old, Arthur. I forget where I put my glasses. I forgot I left the glue in her bag. When she took it yesterday, I thought she was just taking her things. I didn't know the glue was still in there." Arthur studied my face. He was looking for the tell. He was looking for the spark of vengeance. I buried it deep. I channeled the humiliation, the sadness, the fatigue. I became the confused old man who made a terrible, careless mistake. "Negligence," Arthur muttered, leaning back. "That is the play. Criminal negligence. Reckless endangerment. If it is an accident, we are talking about a civil suit. She sues you for damages. She takes your money. But you don't go to jail. I can lose the money, Arthur, I said softly. I don't care about the money. I just don't want to die in a cage. Arthur tapped his fingers on the table. It is a thin line, Harrison. A very thin line. The prosecutor is going to say that no sane man puts epoxy in a lube bottle by accident. They are going to paint you as a mastermind. We have to paint you as a hoarder, a man who saves scraps, a man who is losing his cognitive edge. Can you play that role? Can you sit in front of a jury and let them think you are a senile old fool who shouldn't be trusted with power tools? I swallowed my pride. It tasted bitter like bile. For a man who built skyscrapers pretending to be incompetent was the hardest thing I would ever do. But I looked at Arthur and nodded. I can do it. I am just a tired old man, Arthur. I just wanted to fix my car. Arthur nodded slowly. Okay, we stick to that. You never admit anger. You never admit you knew she was cheating, even though everyone knows you knew. You maintain that you loved her, you trusted her, and this was a horrible, tragic mix-up. He stood up, smoothing his jacket. I am going to talk to Miller. I am going to get you out on bail. It will be high, but you can afford it. Go stay with your daughter. Don't go home. And for God's sake, Harrison, stay away from Home Depot. I watched him walk to the door. I had sold it. Even Arthur the shark had bought the bait. Or maybe he knew I was lying and just didn't care because the story was legally sound. It didn't matter. The foundation was poured. Now I just had to wait for the concrete to set without cracking under the pressure of the lies I had to tell. As the door closed, I allowed myself a very small, very cold smile. I wasn't senile. I was just getting started. Walking out of the police station with a restraining order in my pocket felt heavier than any tool belt I had ever worn. The judge had been clear. I was not to go within 500 feet of the marital home, the guest house, or Monica herself. My own house, the brick-and-mortar testament to my life's work, was now off-limits to me. I was a refugee in the town I helped build. Arthur had offered me a hotel room, but I knew that if I spent a night alone in a generic room with beige walls and a minibar, I might actually lose my mind. I needed family, or at least I needed the closest thing to it that I had left. I gave the taxi driver the address to a condo building in downtown Chicago, about 40 minutes south of Lake Forest. It was where my daughter Audrey lived. We hadn't spoken in 6 months, not since she told me that Monica was a gold digger, and I told her she was just jealous of my happiness. It is a bitter pill to swallow, realizing your child was right about your mistakes, but I swallowed it dry as I watched the city skyline approach. Audrey lives on the 25th floor of a glass tower that looks like a shard of ice piercing the sky. It fits her. She is a forensic accountant, a woman who spends her days dissecting corporate fraud and finding the lies hidden in spreadsheets. She is cold, precise, and sharper than a diamond cutter. I stood in front of her door, raising my hand to knock, and for the first time in 40 years, my hand trembled. I wasn't afraid of the police. I wasn't afraid of prison. But I was terrified of the look I knew I would see in my daughter's eyes. I knocked 3 times, hard. The door opened almost immediately. Audrey stood there wearing a sharp gray business suit, her hair pulled back in a tight bun that didn't allow a single strand to escape. She looked at me, then she looked at the duffel bag Arthur had hastily packed for me, and then she looked back at my face. There was no pity in her eyes. There was no warmth. There was just calculation. "You look terrible, Dad," she said, stepping aside to let me in. I walked into her apartment. It was immaculate. White walls, chrome furniture, abstract art that looked like chaotic geometry. It smelled of lemon pledge and expensive coffee. There were no pictures of us. There were no pictures of family at all. It was a space designed for efficiency, not for living. I sat down on her stiff leather sofa, the leather creaking under my weight. Thank you for letting me in, Audrey. I didn't know where else to go. Audrey walked to her kitchen island, pouring 2 cups of black coffee. She didn't ask how I took it. She knew I drank it black, just like she did. She walked over and handed me a mug, then sat in the armchair opposite me, crossing her legs. She took a sip, her eyes never leaving mine. I saw the news, Dad, she said calmly. The whole office is talking about it. The headline in the digital paper is "Stuck in Suburbia." They are calling it a freak accident involving industrial adhesives. But I know you. You don't have accidents. You measure twice and cut once. You have never been careless in your life. I held the warm mug, letting the heat seep into my cold fingers. I told the police it was a mistake, Audrey. I was confused. I mixed up the bottles. Don't, she cut me off, her voice slicing through the air. Don't lie to me. You can lie to the cops, you can lie to your lawyer, and you can certainly lie to that plastic mannequin you married. But I am your daughter. I know how your mind works. You found out, didn't you? I looked at her. I saw my late first wife in her eyes, but I also saw myself. The stubbornness, the pride. I put the mug down on the glass coffee table with a clink. Yes, I said, my voice dropping to a whisper. I found out. Audrey didn't gasp. She didn't cry. She leaned back, and for a second the corner of her mouth twitched upwards. It wasn't quite a smile, but it was close. So you finally woke up. It took you 10 years and half your retirement fund, but you finally realized that Monica wasn't in love with your charm. She was cheating on me, Audrey. In the guest house. With her tennis instructor. I wanted to make sure they stayed together. Audrey let out a short, sharp laugh. It was a dry sound. You glued them together. Jesus, Dad. That is psychotic. And it is also the most brilliant thing I have heard in years. I looked at my hands. I am facing prison, Audrey. Arthur thinks he can get me off on negligence, but I can't go back to the house. She's going to try to take everything. She is going to sue me for every penny I have left. Audrey stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the city below. The gray light of the overcast day framed her silhouette. She won't just sue you, Dad. She will try to destroy you. Monica has been waiting for you to die or screw up for a decade. Now she has the ammunition. She will play the victim. She will cry on camera, and she will strip you down to the studs. She turned around, her face hard. I told you this would happen. I told you on your wedding day that she was a predator. You didn't listen. You told me I was being difficult. I know I said the shame burning in my chest. I was a fool, Audrey. I was lonely, and I was a fool. I am sorry. I should have listened to you. I should have protected what we built, instead of letting a stranger walk in and take it. Audrey looked at me for a long time. The silence stretched between us, heavy with years of resentment. I waited for her to kick me out. I waited for her to say, I told you so, and slam the door. But she didn't. She walked over to her desk, a sleek glass table dominated by 3 large computer monitors. She sat down and woke up the screens. The blue light illuminated her face, giving her a ghostly cybernetic look. I don't need your apology, Dad, she said, her fingers already flying across the keyboard. Apologies don't fix balance sheets. Apologies don't recover assets. Action does. She spun her chair around to face me. I am not going to help you because you are my father. I am going to help you because I hate that woman more than I hate the idea of you going to prison. If she thinks she is going to take my inheritance and run off with some tennis bum, she has another thing coming. You might be a builder, Dad, but I am an auditor. You build things up. I tear them down to find the rot. And we are going to find every speck of rot in Monica's life. I sat up straighter, feeling a spark of hope for the first time in 24 hours. What are you going to do? Audrey cracked her knuckles. I am going to do what I do best. I am going to follow the money. Monica has been living the high life on your dime, but people like her always get greedy. They get sloppy. She has access to your accounts, right? Joint accounts. I nodded. And she has a supplementary card on my black card. Audrey typed furiously, bringing up banking portals and investment dashboards. Good. That means I can legally look at them as your proxy. If she has been planning to leave you, she hasn't just been buying shoes. She has been siphoning. She has been moving capital. You don't cheat on a multi-millionaire husband without an exit strategy. She gestured for me to come over. I stood up and walked behind her chair, looking at the screens. Rows of numbers, transaction logs, and credit reports filled the monitors. It was a language I didn't speak fluently, but Audrey read it like poetry. Look at this, she pointed to a series of withdrawals. 5,000 here, 9,000 there. Always just under the $10,000 reporting limit. Clever girl. She has been pulling cash out of the joint checking account for 18 months. Where is it going? I asked. Audrey narrowed her eyes. That is what we are going to find out. But look at the dates, Dad. Every time she made a withdrawal, it coincides with a charity trip or a spa weekend. She wasn't spending this money, she was stashing it, or she was giving it to someone. She opened another window, her fingers moving with lethal speed. I am going to run a background check on this Brett character. I want to know his credit score, his criminal record, and every parking ticket he has ever had. If he is sleeping with Monica, he is part of the financial ecosystem now. I watched my daughter work. She was terrifying. She was efficient. And for the first time in years, I felt a surge of pride. I had built buildings, but I had also helped create this woman. She was tough. She was a fighter. And now she was on my side. You can stay here, Audrey said without looking up. The guest room is the second door on the left. But don't expect breakfast in bed. We have work to do. If we are going to beat her, we need to prove that she is not a victim. We need to prove she is a thief. And Dad? I paused at the door to the guest room. Yes. Audrey looked at me, her eyes cold as ice. Next time you want to use industrial glue on someone, ask me first. I might have a better suggestion for where to put it. I nodded, a grim smile forming on my face. Deal. I walked into the guest room and closed the door. I was in exile. I was a criminal suspect. I was a homeless millionaire. But as I listened to the rhythmic clicking of Audrey's keyboard in the next room, I knew one thing for sure. The war had just begun, and I had just recruited the most dangerous soldier on the battlefield. Monica thought she was fighting a lonely old man. She had no idea she was about to go to war with the audit department. I took off my jacket, sat on the edge of the bed, and for the first time since I found the tube of lube, I allowed myself to relax. We were going to catch them. Not with glue this time, but with paper trails, and paper cuts can be surprisingly deadly. For the next 3 hours, the only sound in Audrey's apartment was the hum of the hard drives and the relentless clicking of her mouse. It sounded like hail hitting a tin roof, a constant aggressive rhythm that signaled a storm was coming. I sat in a chair behind her, watching the screens flicker with spreadsheets, bank statements, and property records. To the untrained eye, it was just a sea of numbers, but to Audrey, it was a crime scene, and she was dusting for fingerprints. I watched my daughter work with a mix of awe and intimidation. I used to think I was the one who understood how the world worked, because I knew how to pour concrete and frame a roof. But the world has changed. It is not built on steel anymore. It is built on data. And in this digital world, Audrey was a master architect. She didn't need a sledgehammer to break things. She just needed a password. Dad, look at this, Audrey said, her voice dropping to a tone that sent a chill down my spine. She wasn't angry. She was horrified. And coming from a woman who audits bankrupt corporations for a living, that terrified me. I rolled my chair closer. What is it? Did she drain the savings account? Audrey shook her head slowly. It is worse than savings, Dad. Savings you can replace. This is structural damage. She pointed to a document on the center screen. It looked like a deed, but it was stamped with a red seal that said, "Leanne recorded." "Do you recognize this signature?" she asked, zooming in on a scrawl at the bottom of the page. I squinted. It looked like my name. It had the loops of my H and the sharp strike of my B, but the tail of the K was wrong. It was too long. "That is not me," I said, feeling a tightness in my chest. "I didn't sign that." "What is this document?" "It is a home equity line of credit," Audrey said, her voice shaking with suppressed rage. 6 months ago, a lien was placed on the house in Lake Forest. The bank approved a cash withdrawal of $500,000 against the value of the property. I felt the blood drain from my face. My house. The house I built with my own hands in 1995. I selected every brick. I laid the hardwood floors myself, piece by piece, on my hands and knees. That house was free and clear. I had paid off the mortgage 15 years ago. It was the one thing I owned that was truly mine, the one thing I planned to leave to Audrey. And now she was telling me it was mortgaged. $500,000. I whispered, my voice barely audible. She mortgaged my house for $500,000. How is that possible? I never went to the bank. Audrey clicked on another window. She didn't go to the bank either, Dad. She did it all online. Digital notary. It is easy to fake if you have someone's social security number, their email passwords, and a copy of their driver's license. She forged your digital identity. She stole the equity right out from under the foundation while you were sleeping in the master bedroom. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the city lights. I felt sick. Physically sick. Betrayal is one thing. Sleeping with a tennis instructor is a moral failing. It hurts the heart. But this was theft. This was a calculated, cold-blooded dismantling of my life's work. She didn't just want a lover. She wanted to strip me clean. She wanted to leave me with a hollow shell of a house and a debt I couldn't pay. "Where did the money go?" I asked, turning back to Audrey. "You don't just withdraw $500,000 and stuff it in a mattress." "That is the interesting part," Audrey said, her fingers flying across the keyboard again. She moved the money through 3 different accounts in 3 days, trying to wash it, make it look like investment transfers. But she is an amateur. She left breadcrumbs. Audrey brought up a flowchart she had just generated. The money started in your joint account, went to a private account in her name, and then was wire transferred in a lump sum to a corporate entity called Summit Horizon LLC, registered in Delaware. Summit Horizon, I repeated. Sounds like a fake travel agency. Who owns it? Audrey smirked, a dark, predatory look crossing her face. Delaware allows anonymous LLCs, so on the surface you can't see the owner. But whoever set this up made a mistake. They used a registered agent address in Chicago for the billing of the incorporation fees. And guess whose credit card paid the $90 filing fee? She hit a key and a name popped up on the screen in big, bold letters. Brett Daniels. The room went silent. The tennis instructor. The man currently lying in a hospital bed with pieces of my wife's skin grafted to his hip. He wasn't just a boy toy. He wasn't just a midlife crisis for Monica. He was a partner in crime. "He is not an investor," Audrey said, leaning back in her chair. "I just ran his financials. Brett Daniels has a credit score of 450. He has 3 judgments against him for unpaid gambling debts in Nevada. He owes the IRS $60,000. He is drowning, Dad. And Monica threw him a life preserver made of your money." I sank back into the chair. It all made sense now. The secrecy. The way she had been pushing me to sell the house and move to a condo in Florida. She wasn't trying to downsize for our retirement. She was trying to cover her tracks. If we sold the house, the mortgage would be paid off from the proceeds, and I might never have noticed the missing $500,000 until it was too late. "This changes everything," I said. My hands were gripping the armrests so hard my knuckles were white. This isn't a divorce case anymore, Audrey. No, Audrey said softly. It is a RICO case. It is fraud, grand larceny, conspiracy. She looked at me, her eyes softening just a fraction. Dad, I need you to understand what this means. Monica didn't just fall in love with a younger man. She was targeted. Or she targeted you. They planned this. They were going to bleed you dry, sell the house, and run off with the cash, leaving you with nothing but memories and a bad heart. I closed my eyes. I thought about the nights Monica would sit with me asking about my estate planning, asking where I kept the deeds. I thought it was concern. It was reconnaissance. I felt a fool, yes, but the shame was quickly being replaced by a cold, hard resolve. The same resolve I used when I had to fire a foreman who was stealing copper wire from a job site. You don't negotiate with thieves. You lock the gate and you call the sheriff. So the glue, I said, opening my eyes. Audrey let out a short laugh. The glue was the best thing you ever did. If you hadn't glued them together, they would be on a flight to the Caymans right now with your money. That accident froze them in place. Literally. It bought us time. She stood up and handed me a file she had just printed. It was still warm. Here's the paper trail. We have the forgery. We have the wire transfer. We have the connection to Brett. Tomorrow when you go to that deposition, or when the police try to press charges for the glue, we don't just defend you. We drop a nuclear bomb on them. I took the file. It felt heavy, but it was a good weight. It was the weight of ammunition. Can we get the house back? I asked. Audrey looked at the screen, biting her lip. We can freeze the assets of the LLC. If they haven't spent it all, we can recover it. But the bank will still want their money. We might have to fight the bank to prove fraud. It is going to be a long war, Dad. I looked at the file in my hands. I have built skyscrapers in the middle of winter, Audrey. I have poured concrete in sub-zero temperatures. I know how to fight a long war. I stood up feeling stronger than I had in years. The confused old man was gone. Harrison Burke, the contractor, was back. And I had a new project. I wasn't building a house this time. I was building a cage. And I had the exact measurements for the 2 rats I was going to put inside it. Get some sleep, Audrey said, turning off the monitors. Tomorrow is going to be a bloodbath. I walked to the guest room, clutching the file to my chest. I wasn't going to sleep. I was going to memorize every number, every date, every lie. When I walked into that courtroom, I wasn't going to be the defendant. I was going to be the executioner. And the weapon wasn't epoxy. It was the truth. The next morning, while Audrey was still asleep, I slipped out of the apartment. I knew I was taking a risk. My lawyer had told me to keep my head down to stay invisible, but sitting in a high-rise condo looking at spreadsheets isn't how I operate. I am a man who needs to see the site conditions with my own eyes. A blueprint can tell you a wall is there, but it can't tell you if the drywall is rotting from the inside. Audrey had found the paper trail, but I needed to see the man at the end of it. I needed to see Brett Daniels. I rented a nondescript gray sedan, the kind of car that disappears in traffic, and drove to the address Audrey had dug up. It wasn't in Lake Forest. It wasn't even in a nice part of Chicago. It was in a decaying neighborhood near the industrial district where the buildings were covered in soot and the windows were barred. This was where the man who was sleeping with my wife actually lived. It was a far cry from the guest house I had built with cedar siding and heated floors. I parked across the street from his apartment complex, a grim brick building that looked like it had been condemned years ago. I pulled my cap down low and waited. Patience is a tool just like a level or a saw. You have to know when to use it. I sat there for 2 hours watching the front door, drinking lukewarm coffee from a thermos. At 10 o'clock, the door opened. Brett stepped out. Or rather, he shuffled out. Seeing him walk brought a grim satisfaction to my soul. He was moving stiffly, favoring his right side, his gait awkward and painful. The doctors had obviously managed to separate him from Monica, but the epoxy had taken its toll. He looked like a man who had gone 10 rounds with a belt sander. He was wearing baggy sweatpants, probably because anything tighter would irritate the skin grafts on his hip. He didn't look like the dashing tennis pro anymore. In the harsh light of the morning, stripped of his country club whites and his confident swagger, he looked like exactly what he was. A user. A bottom feeder. He lit a cigarette with a shaking hand, looking over his shoulder nervously. He wasn't waiting for an Uber. He was waiting for trouble. 10 minutes later, a black SUV with tinted windows rolled up to the curb. It didn't park. It just idled there, ominous and heavy. Brett threw his cigarette down and limped over to the passenger window. I cracked my own window just an inch, hoping the wind would carry their voices. I didn't need to hear everything. The body language told the story. The window of the SUV rolled down. I couldn't see the driver, but I saw a hand reach out and grab Brett by the collar of his shirt, jerking him forward. Brett stumbled, his face slamming against the doorframe. He didn't fight back. He just held his hands up in a gesture of pathetic surrender. "Please," I heard Brett plead, his voice high and thin. "I just need a few more days. The wire transfer is clearing. There was a hold on the bank account because of the accident." The voice from inside the car was low, a rumble of threat. "You have been saying a few more days for a month, Brett. The boss is losing patience. You said you had a whale on the hook. You said the lady was going to cash out the house." She is. Brett stammered, desperation leaking from every pore. "She mortgaged the place. 500 grand. It is sitting in the shell company account. I just can't access it until I get to a computer and bypass the freeze. She is in the hospital, man. It is complicated, but she is my golden goose. I have her wrapped around my finger. She will sign whatever I tell her to sign." I felt a wave of nausea wash over me. It wasn't jealousy. I realized in that moment that I hadn't felt jealous of Brett since the moment I saw him. Jealousy implies that you think the other man has won something of value. Seeing him now begging a loan shark for time selling out Monica like she was livestock, I didn't feel jealous. I felt pity, and I felt a profound, deep disgust for my wife. Monica thought she was having a passionate affair. She thought she was reclaiming her youth with a man who desired her. But to this man, she wasn't a lover. She was a payday. She was a whale, a golden goose. He was using her to pay off gambling debts, and she was so blinded by her own vanity that she couldn't see the hook in her mouth. The hand released Brett, shoving him back onto the sidewalk. He nearly fell, clutching his bandaged hip, wincing in pain. 48 hours, the voice growled, or we take the rest of your skin. The SUV peeled away, leaving a cloud of exhaust fumes. Brett stood there, dusting himself off, trying to regain some shred of composure. He looked around, checking if anyone had seen his humiliation. He looked right at my car, but he didn't see me. He didn't see Harrison Burke. He just saw a gray sedan. He turned and limped back into his building, a rat scurrying back to its hole. I sat there for a long time, gripping the steering wheel. The pieces of the puzzle weren't just fitting together. They were locking into place with the force of a deadbolt. This wasn't a love triangle. It was a financial crime in progress. Brett was the architect of the fraud, but Monica was the one who had opened the door and let him in. She had risked our home, my legacy, and her own dignity for a man who would sell her out for a stack of poker chips. I started the engine and drove away slowly. My anger had changed. It was no longer hot and reactive. It was cold, hard, and functional. It was the kind of anger that fuels a demolition. I wasn't just going to defend myself in court anymore. I was going to save Monica from herself, and then I was going to destroy them both. I realized then that the glue had been a mercy. If I hadn't trapped them, if they hadn't been hospitalized, Brett would have drained that account by now. He would have taken the money and disappeared, leaving Monica with the debt and the heartbreak. In a twisted irony, my revenge had actually protected my assets. I drove back to the city, my mind racing. I needed to tell Audrey. We had the motive now. We knew where the pressure points were. Brett was weak. He was terrified. And a terrified man makes mistakes. If we could squeeze him, if we could show him that jail was safer than the people in that black SUV, he would flip. He would testify against Monica to save his own skin. I pulled out my phone and dialed Arthur. Harrison Arthur answered, his voice warning. "You better not be near that house." "I am not near the house, Arthur," I said, merging onto the highway. But I found something better. I found the weak link in the chain. Get the deposition ready for tomorrow. I am going to have a lot to say. I hung up and pressed the accelerator. The city skyline rose up ahead of me, steel and glass shining in the sun. I was done being the victim. It was time to go to work. I had a foundation to inspect, and I was going to bring the whole corrupt structure down on their heads. When I returned to the apartment, the mood had shifted. Audrey wasn't sitting at her desk anymore. She was rummaging through a cardboard box in the back of the hallway closet. It was a box labeled Old Tech, the kind of graveyard where obsolete chargers and cracked screens go to die. I stood in the doorway, watching her toss aside tangled cables and dead batteries until her hand closed around something rectangular and dusty. It was an iPad. The screen was spiderwebbed with cracks, and the aluminum case was dented at the corner. I recognized it immediately. It was Monica's old tablet, the one she claimed she had dropped down the stairs a year ago. She had demanded a new one, the latest model, instantly, and tossed this one into the junk drawer without a second thought. Audrey walked back to the living room, blowing the dust off the screen. She plugged it into a charger. The battery icon flashed red, a weak pulse of life returning to a device that had been dead for 12 months. "You said she never logs out of anything." Audrey muttered, her eyes fixed on the screen. "If this thing is still linked to her iCloud account, and if she has message forwarding turned on, it might have synced everything from her phone right up until the battery died. Or if we are lucky, it will sync everything now once it connects to the Wi-Fi." I watched the Apple logo appear. It was a white ghost glowing in the dim room. I felt a strange sense of dread. We had already found the money. We knew about the fraud. I didn't think there was anything left to find that could shock me. I was wrong. The home screen loaded. It was a picture of Monica, of course. A selfie taken in our garden, filtered to perfection. Audrey swiped to unlock. It asked for a passcode. "Try her birthday," I said. Audrey shook her head. Too obvious. She tried the last 4 digits of her social. It unlocked. Predictability is the downfall of every amateur criminal. The device connected to Audrey's Wi-Fi network. Suddenly, the notification center began to cascade. It was like a dam breaking. Ding after ding after ding. Emails, calendar alerts, and iMessages flooded the screen, updating from the cloud. The tablet was catching up on a year of secrets in a matter of seconds. Audrey clicked on the green message icon. She scrolled past the endless threads with her friends, the gossip, the complaints about how boring her life was. Then she found the thread with a contact saved as yoga instructor. It was Brett. I leaned over her shoulder. The timestamps were the first thing I noticed. They had been texting constantly, every hour, every day. I read the messages and my stomach turned. They weren't just love letters. They were mocking me. They made fun of the way I ate, the way I dressed, the way I tried to save money by fixing things myself. "He is so cheap," Monica wrote. "He fixed the toaster again instead of buying a new one. I swear he loves that toaster more than he loves me. He is just saving his pennies for us," baby Brett replied. "Let him fix the toaster. We will buy a gold one when this is over." Audrey scrolled down. Her finger hovered over the date of the accident. Tuesday, the day of the glue, the day I changed the lubricant, the day my life exploded. There were messages from that afternoon. "I am coming over at 7, Brett wrote. "Is the old man out?" He is in the garage, Monica replied. Polishing that stupid car. He won't hear a thing. But we have to be quick with the paperwork before we have fun. Did you get the transfer forms ready? Yes, Brett said. And the other thing. Did you get the other thing ready? My heart stopped beating for a second. The other thing. Audrey scrolled down further. The next message was sent at 5:30 in the afternoon. I was sitting in my armchair, then drinking my scotch, waiting for Monica to come home. I got the prescription refilled, Monica wrote. High-dose digoxin. The doctor said it can mimic a heart attack if taken with alcohol. I ground up 4 of them. I put the powder in his decanter. He always has a nightcap before bed. I read the words, but my brain refused to process them. Digoxin. It is a heart medication. I take a low dose for my arrhythmia, but a high dose, mixed with scotch. That isn't medicine. That is a weapon. Audrey's hand flew to her mouth. Oh my God, she whispered. Dad, they weren't just stealing the house. I stared at the screen, reading the next message from Brett. Good girl. Make sure he drinks it all. If he goes into cardiac arrest tonight, the autopsy will just show heart failure. He is 72. Nobody will ask questions. Then the trust fund doesn't split. You get everything as the grieving widow. Audrey gets nothing. I felt the room spin. I grabbed the back of the chair to steady myself. The air in the apartment suddenly felt very thin. I thought about that night. I had poured myself a drink. I had held the glass in my hand. But I hadn't finished it. I was too distracted by the anticipation of the trap I had set. I had left the glass on the table when I went outside to watch the police arrive. If I had drunk that glass, if I had been a normal, oblivious husband who just wanted to relax after a long day, I would be dead right now. I would be lying in a morgue, and Monica would be playing the role of the tragic widow wearing black silk and crying crocodile tears at my funeral. The glue didn't just embarrass them. The glue didn't just save my money. The glue saved my life. Because Monica got stuck to Brett, she never came back into the house to check on me. She never came back to make sure I finished my drink. The chaos of the ambulance, the fire truck, the police, it all happened before the poison could do its work. Audrey looked up at me, her eyes filled with tears. This isn't fraud, Dad. This is attempted murder. They were going to kill you. They were going to kill you tonight. I sank onto the sofa. My legs gave out. I have faced dangerous situations on construction sites. I have seen cranes collapse. I have seen scaffolding give way. But I have never felt fear like this. The woman I slept next to. The woman I trusted. She wasn't just a gold digger. She was a killer. She had looked me in the eye, kissed me on the cheek, and told me to get some rest, knowing that she intended for that rest to be eternal. She kissed me, I whispered. She kissed me goodbye. She knew she was never going to speak to me again. Audrey grabbed the iPad. She was shaking, but her voice was steel. We have them. We have them dead to rights. This isn't circumstantial. This is a written confession, premeditated, conspiracy to commit capital murder. She started taking screenshots, backing up the files to 3 different hard drives. She was moving fast, panicked but precise. We need to call Arthur. We need to call the police. But not the local cops. We need the state police. This is major crimes now. I sat there looking at my hands. These hands had built houses. They had built a life. And they had, by the grace of God and a tube of epoxy, built a shield that stopped a bullet I didn't even know was coming. I started to laugh. It was a low, dry chuckle that sounded like gravel crunching. What is funny? Audrey asked, pausing her frantic typing. I looked at her. I swapped the lube for glue because I wanted to be petty, Audrey. I wanted to ruin their night. I didn't know I was disarming an assassin. I stood up. The fear was gone. It was replaced by a cold, righteous fury. It was the kind of fury that burns clean and hot, leaving no ash behind. "Call Arthur," I said. "Tell him to bring the district attorney, and tell him to bring a hazmat suit, because the toxicity in this marriage just went off the charts." I walked to the window and looked out at the city. Somewhere in a hospital room, Monica and Brett were recovering, probably thinking they could still talk their way out of this. They thought the glue was the worst thing that could happen to them. They had no idea. The glue was just the adhesive. The real weight was about to drop, and when it hit them, it was going to crush them into dust. I am not just a victim of a bad marriage anymore, Audrey. I am a survivor of a hit job, and the hitman is about to find out what happens when you miss. I turned back to my daughter. "Print it all, Audrey. Print every word. We are going to wallpaper the courtroom with their sins." Audrey hit the print button. The printer in the corner whirred to life, spitting out page after page of evidence. It sounded like a machine gun. And in a way it was. We were loading the chamber. And tomorrow we were going to fire. The conference room at the law firm of Sterling and Associates was designed to intimidate. It was all glass walls, polished mahogany, and a view of the Chicago skyline that screamed power and money. I sat on one side of the massive table flanked by Arthur and Audrey. On the other side sat Monica and her shark of a lawyer, a man named Sterling, who wore a suit that cost more than my first truck. Monica was sitting on a special orthopedic cushion, shifting her weight uncomfortably every few seconds. The skin grafts were evidently still healing, and sitting down was a painful reminder of the bond I had forced her to share with her lover. She looked pale, but her eyes were burning with a triumph she had been waiting 10 years to feel. Sterling didn't waste time with pleasantries. He slid a thick document across the table, the paper hissing against the wood. "Mr. Burke," he said, his voice smooth and condescending, "we are all practical men here. Your wife has suffered a traumatic injury due to your gross negligence. We have the police report. We have the medical records. We have the tube of industrial epoxy with your fingerprints on it. If we go to trial, a jury will not see a confused senior citizen. They will see a vindictive man who maimed his wife. You are looking at 10 years in a state penitentiary." I hunched my shoulders, making myself look smaller. I let my hands tremble visibly as I reached for my water glass. I took a sip, letting the glass clatter against my teeth. I just wanted to fix the car. I stammered, my voice weak and raspy. I didn't mean to hurt anyone. Sterling smiled, a predator smelling blood. "We know, Harrison. We know. And that is why we are offering you a way out. A mercy." He tapped the document. "Sign this agreement. You will transfer full ownership of the Lake Forest property to Monica. You will liquidate your investment portfolio and transfer 80% of the assets to her as a settlement for her pain and suffering. In exchange, Monica will drop the criminal charges and sign a non-disclosure agreement. You will not go to prison. Instead, we have arranged a very comfortable room for you at the Whispering Pines Assisted Living Facility. It is a nice place. They have bingo on Tuesdays." I heard Audrey take a sharp breath beside me. She wanted to scream. She wanted to leap across the table and tear Sterling's throat out. I had to kick her gently under the table to remind her of the plan. We were fishing, and the fish was taking the bait. I looked at Monica. She was watching me with a smirk that twisted her beautiful, treacherous face. "You should take the deal, Harrison," she said, her voice dripping with fake concern. "You are obviously not capable of living on your own anymore. The house is too big for you. You are dangerous to yourself and others. Let me take care of the burden of the estate. You just rest." I looked down at the table, staring at the grain of the wood. The burden of the estate. The estate I built while she was shopping. The estate she had already tried to steal. I swallowed hard, forcing tears into my eyes. It is hard to cry on command, but when you think about your life's work being handed to a woman who tried to poison you, The tears come easier than you might think. If I sign this, I whispered. If I sign this, you promise not to send the police after me. We promise, Sterling said, pushing a pen towards me. It is a binding agreement. You give up the assets, we give up the prosecution. It is a clean break. I reached for the pen, my hand shaking so bad I almost dropped it. Arthur leaned in, playing his part perfectly. Harrison, are you sure about this? This leaves you with almost nothing. You will be living on a stipend. I have no choice, Arthur, I said loud enough for them to hear. I am old. I made a mistake. I don't want to die in jail. I picked up the pen. Then I paused. I looked up at Sterling, projecting the image of a man clinging to his last shred of dignity. There is one condition, I said. Sterling sighed, annoyed. What now? I want this finalized in court, I said. I want a judge to sign off on it publicly. I don't want people whispering that I was bullied into this in a back room. I want a hearing where we present this agreement, and I want to make a statement. A short statement. Apologizing to Monica. I want to leave this town with my head high, admitting my mistake and doing the right thing. Sterling looked at Monica. They exchanged a glance. They thought I was worried about my reputation. They thought I was a proud old fool who just wanted to save face before being shipped off to the nursing home. They didn't see the trap. They didn't see that by demanding a hearing, I was ensuring there would be a court reporter, a judge, and a public record. Fine, Sterling said, waving his hand dismissively. We can schedule a ratification hearing for Friday. You can make your little speech. But you sign the preliminary agreement now. I nodded slowly. I put the pen to the paper. I signed my name. Harrison Burke. The letters were shaky, uneven, the signature of a broken man. But inside my heart was beating with the steady, powerful rhythm of a pile driver. I wasn't signing away my fortune. I was signing their death warrant. Monica reached out and snatched the paper as soon as I lifted the pen. She checked the signature, then folded the document and placed it in her purse. She looked at me, and for a second, the mask slipped. Her eyes were cold, dead sharks. You did the right thing, Harrison, she said. The movers will be at the house on Monday to pack your things. Take only what you need. The rest belongs to me now. I stood up, leaning heavily on the table. Thank you, Monica, I mumbled. You have always looked out for me. We walked out of the conference room in silence. Audrey held my arm, supporting me as if I were frail. We took the elevator down to the lobby. We walked out onto the bustling street of downtown Chicago. The moment the revolving doors spun behind us, I straightened my back. The tremble in my hands vanished. The cloud in my eyes cleared. Audrey looked at me, a fierce grin breaking across her face. You deserve an Oscar for that, Dad. I almost believed you were giving up. I adjusted my collar, taking a deep breath of the city air. It smelled of exhaust and hot dogs, but to me it smelled like victory. They think they have won, Audrey. They think the war is over. They are going to go home, open a bottle of champagne, and toast to their brilliance. They are going to get sloppy. They are going to lower their shields. And on Friday, Audrey said, checking her watch, we walk into that courtroom, and we don't apologize. We detonate. I nodded. Friday, the ratification hearing. The judge thinks he is just rubber stamping a divorce settlement. He has no idea he is about to preside over a murder trial. I looked at the reflection of myself in the glass building. I didn't see an old man. I saw a demolition expert holding the detonator. Let's go get lunch, I said to my daughter. I have a sudden appetite. And then we are going to prepare the exhibits. I want those text messages blown up on poster boards. I want the font so big that even the people in the back row can read the word poison without squinting. We hailed a taxi, leaving the law firm behind us. Up in that tower, Monica was probably already browsing real estate listings in the Caribbean, spending the money she thought she had just secured. She didn't know that the ink on that contract was the only thing holding her life together, and come Friday, I was going to set it on fire. Friday arrived with a sky the color of a bruised plum hanging low and heavy over the Cook County Courthouse. I walked up the limestone steps with Arthur on my left and Audrey on my right. We looked less like a legal team and more like mourners arriving at a funeral, which in a way was exactly what this was intended to be. The funeral of my reputation. The funeral of Harrison Burke, the respected community pillar. Inside, the air was stale, recycled through vents that hadn't been cleaned since the Reagan administration. It smelled of floor wax, nervous sweat, and the distinct metallic scent of judgment. We entered courtroom 4B. It was already packed. News of the adhesive incident had traveled fast, fueled by the internet and the sheer absurdity of the situation. Half of Lake Forest seemed to be crammed into the gallery benches. I saw neighbors who used to wave at me while walking their dogs, now averting their eyes or whispering behind their hands. I saw Mrs. Higgins in the third row clutching her purse as if I might spring from the defense table and glue her to the bench. To them, I wasn't a victim of infidelity. I was a monster. I was the crazy old man who had mutilated his young, beautiful wife in a fit of jealous rage. I sat down at the defendant's table. The wood was scarred with the graffiti of 1,000 other desperate people who had sat here before me, but I kept my hands folded on top of it perfectly still. I held my old fountain pen in my right hand. It was a Mont Blanc I had bought 30 years ago to sign the contract for the municipal library. It was heavy, cold, and solid. It was my anchor in a room that was trying to wash me away. "All rise," the bailiff bellowed, and Judge Sylvia Thorne swept into the room. She was a formidable woman with steel gray hair and eyes that could spot a lie from across a parking lot. Or so I hoped. Today, she looked tired. She looked at me over the rim of her glasses with an expression that sat somewhere between pity and disgust. To her, this was just another domestic dispute that had gotten out of hand, a waste of the court's time that needed to be rubber-stamped and filed away. Mr. Sterling stood up, buttoning his jacket with a flourish. "Your Honor, we are here to ratify the settlement agreement reached between the parties. However, before we proceed to the signing, my client, Mrs. Monica Burke, wishes to make a victim impact statement. She wants the court to understand the physical and emotional toll this horrific attack has taken on her." Judge Thorne nodded. "Proceed." Monica stood up. She was wearing a pale blue dress that was modest, almost conservative, a stark contrast to the red silk number she had worn the night of the incident. She had a bandage on her arm and walked with a noticeable limp, clutching a cane that I had never seen her use before. It was a prop, a brilliant piece of theater designed to elicit sympathy. She took the stand, swore to tell the truth, and then sat down wincing, as if the simple act of sitting caused her agony. "Please tell the court what happened," Sterling said softly, his voice dripping with rehearsed compassion. Monica took a deep breath, and the tears started instantly. They didn't flow. They welled up in her large doe eyes, shimmering under the courtroom lights. "I just wanted to check on the car," she began, her voice trembling. "Harrison loves that car so much. I thought I heard a noise, so I went out to the garage. I sat in the seat to see if everything was okay. I reached for the hand sanitizer in my bag. I didn't know. I didn't know he had filled the bottle with industrial epoxy." She paused to dab her eyes with a tissue. A murmur of sympathy rippled through the gallery. I sat like a stone gargoyle watching her performance. She was good. She had omitted Brett entirely. She had omitted the guest house. In her version of the story, she was a dutiful wife, checking on her husband's prized possession, only to be maimed by his negligence. The pain was instant, she sobbed. It felt like fire. It felt like my skin was melting. I tried to get up, but I was stuck. I was trapped in the dark. I screamed for Harrison, but he didn't come. I was there for hours, Your Honor. Terrified. Alone. She looked directly at me then. It was a look of pure, unadulterated accusation. When the paramedics finally came, they had to cut my clothes off. They had to use solvents that burned even worse than the glue. And at the hospital, She broke down, burying her face in her hands. Sterling stepped forward, placing a hand on her shoulder. "Take your time, Monica." She looked up, her face streaked with mascara. "The doctors had to surgically remove the skin from my thigh and hip. I required 20 stitches. I have permanent scarring. I will never look the same again. And the worst part is knowing that the man I loved, the man I dedicated the last 10 years of my life to, did this to me. He treated me like a broken tile that needed to be discarded." The room was silent. You could hear a pin drop. The hatred directed at me was palpable. It radiated from the gallery, from the bailiff, even from the judge. I could feel their eyes boring into the back of my neck. They saw a sadist. They saw a man who had abused his power and his chemistry, set to torture a woman. Sterling let the silence hang there for a moment, maximizing the impact. "Your Honor, Mr. Burke has agreed to transfer the marital assets to my client as restitution for this heinous act. We believe this is a fair and just resolution that avoids a lengthy criminal trial and allows Mrs. Burke to begin the long, painful process of healing. We ask the court to accept this agreement and grant the restraining order permanently." Judge Thorne looked at me. Her expression was hard. "Mr. Burke," she said, her voice sharp, "I have heard the statement. I have reviewed the medical photos. They are gruesome. You are very lucky that your wife is willing to settle this civilly. If this were a criminal trial, I would be looking at sentencing guidelines that would put you away for a significant amount of time. Do you understand the gravity of what you have done?" I stood up slowly. My knees popped in the quiet room. I leaned on the table, clutching my pen. I looked at Monica, who was now drying her eyes, a smug satisfaction hidden beneath her tissue. I looked at Sterling, who was already uncapping his expensive gold pen, ready to sign the victory papers. I looked at the gallery, at the neighbors who had already convicted me in the court of public opinion. "Yes, Your Honor," I said, my voice low and raspy. "I understand perfectly. I understand that my wife is in pain. I understand that she has scars. And I understand that everyone in this room thinks I am a confused, angry old man who lost control." I paused, looking down at the empty table in front of me. I let my hand shake just a little bit more. "I am ready to sign the agreement, Your Honor. I am ready to give her everything she deserves." Sterling smirked. He pushed the papers toward me, but I added, my voice suddenly becoming stronger, losing the tremor, losing the rasp. "Before I sign my name to this document, there is one small clerical error I need to correct. The agreement states that the cause of the injury was an accident involving a car repair." Judge Thorne narrowed her eyes. "Is that not the case, Mr. Burke?" "No." "Your Honor," I said, straightening my back, "the epoxy wasn't for the car, and my wife wasn't alone in that seat. And she certainly wasn't checking on my Mustang." Sterling stood up. "Objection. This is irrelevant. The defendant has already agreed to the terms." "Sit down, Mr. Sterling," Judge Thorne snapped. "I want to hear what he has to say." "Go on, Mr. Burke." I looked at Audrey. She nodded, reaching into her briefcase. I turned back to the judge. "I didn't act out of confusion, Your Honor. And I didn't act out of jealousy. I acted out of self-defense. Because the woman sitting there crying about her scars didn't come here today to get justice. She came here to finish the job she started on Tuesday night. She isn't a victim, Your Honor. She is a failed assassin." A gasp went through the courtroom. Monica's face went white. Sterling looked like he had swallowed a lemon. I motioned to Audrey. "My daughter has some exhibits she would like to present to the court. I think you will find them more interesting than the medical records." Audrey stood up and placed a stack of poster boards on an easel facing the judge and the gallery. The first one was covered in a black cloth. Sterling was shouting now. "Your Honor, this is an ambush. This is highly irregular." Overruled. Judge Thorne banged her gavel, the sound echoing like a gunshot. "Mr. Burke, You have exactly 3 minutes to explain yourself before I hold you in contempt. I smiled. A cold, hard smile. 3 minutes is all I need, Your Honor. Audrey, unveil Exhibit A. Audrey pulled the cloth down. The large poster board revealed the blown-up text messages from the iPad. The font was massive. The words were undeniable. I pointed to the board with my fountain pen. That is a conversation between my grieving wife and her lover Brett Daniels, dated 3 hours before the accident. I began to read aloud, my voice filling the room, booming with the authority of a man who had commanded construction sites for 40 years. High-dose digoxin, ground up in his decanter. Make sure he drinks it all. I looked at Monica. She wasn't crying anymore. She was staring at the board, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. The color had drained from her face completely. That isn't a love letter, Monica, I said, my voice cutting through the stunned silence. That is a murder plot. And the only reason I am standing here today, the only reason I am not in a box 6 feet under, is because you got stuck to your boyfriend before you could come back inside to make sure I drank the poison. The courtroom erupted. It wasn't a murmur this time. It was an explosion. Mrs. Higgins screamed. The bailiff stepped forward. Judge Thorne stood up, her eyes wide with shock. I looked at the judge. The epoxy didn't just bond their skin. Your Honor, it bonded them to the crime. I am not signing this agreement. I am signing a criminal complaint. I sat back down, placing my pen on the table. The silence that followed the chaos was the sweetest sound I had ever heard. It was the sound of a foundation crumbling. And I was the one holding the sledgehammer. Sterling was still shouting about relevance, his face a mask of panicked sweat, trying to separate the shocking revelation of the poison from the civil liability of the glue. He was desperate to regain control of a narrative that was spiraling into a criminal indictment. He pounded his fist on the table, demanding that the court focus on the physical evidence of the injury, not the alleged text messages. He argued that regardless of any conspiracy, I had still placed a dangerous chemical in a container designed for intimacy, and that act alone constituted a tort. Judge Thorne banged her gavel, silencing him. She looked at Arthur. Mr. Caldwell, your client has made a very serious accusation regarding the poison. But Mr. Sterling is technically correct on one point. We are here to discuss the settlement regarding the adhesive incident. Unless you can prove that the placement of the glue was not an act of malicious negligence, the civil suit stands regardless of the wife's character. Arthur stood up. He didn't look worried. He looked like a man who was holding a royal flush in a game of penny poker. We are happy to address the glue, Your Honor. In fact, we believe the adhesive incident itself proves that Mr. Burke is not liable. We would like to examine the physical evidence, the bottle itself. The bailiff retrieved the evidence bag containing the lubricant tube. It was mangled, cut open by the hospital staff during the frantic separation process, but the label was still intact. It looked like a standard innocent bottle of strawberry gel. Sterling smirked, thinking we were grasping at straws. Arthur put on a pair of latex gloves and took the bottle. He held it up for the courtroom to see. It looks like a trap, doesn't it? Arthur said, his voice calm. It looks like a husband hiding a weapon in plain sight. That is what the plaintiff wants you to believe. But my client is a general contractor, Your Honor. He has spent 40 years adhering to OSHA safety regulations. He knows that when you transfer a chemical to a secondary container, you must label it. Sterling laughed. Label it. There is no label on that bottle. It says strawberry pleasure. Arthur reached into his briefcase and pulled out a high-intensity UV flashlight, the kind forensic teams use to find trace fluids. He also pulled out a standard heavy-duty construction flashlight. He walked to the judge's bench. May I, Your Honor? Judge Thorne nodded. Arthur dimmed the lights in the courtroom. A hush fell over the gallery. In the semi-darkness, Arthur shone the bright construction beam directly onto the surface of the bottle, angling it sharply against the plastic. They're etched into the plastic with a black industrial marker. Directly over the dark red branding of the label were words. They were faint because of the color-on-color black ink on dark red plastic, but under the direct, harsh light, they were visible. "I marked it," I said from my seat, my voice cutting through the gloom. I wrote on it, "Adhesive. Danger. Do not touch." Sterling rushed forward, squinting. "That is impossible. My client would have seen that." Arthur turned off the flashlight, and the room returned to the ambient dim lighting of a cloudy day. The writing vanished, blending back into the busy design of the bottle's label. "You can only see it if you are looking for it," Arthur said. "You can only see it if you have proper lighting. You can only see it if you are using the product safely and responsibly." He turned to the judge. "Your Honor, my client followed the safety protocols of his trade. He labeled the hazard. The question is, why didn't Mrs. Burke and Mr. Daniels see the warning?" I stood up then. I didn't wait for permission. I needed to drive the nail home. They didn't see it because they were in the dark. "Your Honor," I said. I walked out from behind the table, standing in the center of the court. My wife testified that she was just checking on the car. She lied. You don't check on a car in pitch blackness. You don't check on a car by sliding the seat back and getting naked. I pointed at the bottle in Arthur's hand. That warning was there. If they had turned on the dome light, they would have seen it. If they had used a flashlight, they would have seen it. If they had been doing anything legitimate, anything honest, they would have seen the danger. I looked directly at Monica. She was shrinking into her seat, her face pale. "But they weren't doing anything honest," I continued, my voice rising. "They were thieves in the night. They were sneaking around in the shadows of my garage in the dark, trying to steal a moment of pleasure in a car that didn't belong to them. They were hiding. And because they were hiding, they were blind." I turned back to the judge. "In the construction world, Your Honor, if a trespasser breaks into a job site at 2 a.m, ignores the fences, ignores the signs, and falls into a foundation pit because he didn't turn on his flashlight, the builder isn't liable. The trespasser assumed the risk the moment he decided to break the law." Sterling stammered, trying to find an objection. "But they weren't trespassing. It is her house, too. It is my car," I snapped. "And it was my workspace. I labeled the chemical. I put it in a bag to transport it to my shop the next morning. They went into my personal property in the dark to commit adultery, and as we now know, to celebrate a murder plot. Their injury isn't the result of my negligence. It is the result of their own guilt. They were afraid to turn on the light because they didn't want the neighbors to see, and because they chose the darkness, they suffered the consequences of the dark." Judge Thorne looked at the bottle again. She took the flashlight from Arthur and shone it on the plastic herself. She traced the letters with her finger. "Adhesive. Danger." She looked up at me, and for the first time the disgust was gone from her eyes. It was replaced by a cold, sharp realization. "The court acknowledges the evidence," Judge Thorne said, her voice steady. "The container was labeled. The failure to observe the warning was due to the conditions created by the plaintiff." She looked at Sterling. "Mr. Sterling, your argument for a civil tort relies on the idea that Mr. Burke created an unavoidable trap. But a trap doesn't come with a warning label. A trap relies on deception. This appears to be a case of a safety hazard that was ignored because the plaintiffs were engaged in illicit activity that required concealment." Sterling looked like he had been punched in the gut. "But, Your Honor, the intent." "The intent," Judge Thorne cut him off, "seems very clear now. Mr. Burke intended to store glue. Your client intended to commit fraud and potentially murder, and in her haste and secrecy, she injured herself. This isn't a battery case, Counselor. This is a workplace accident caused by a burglar." I sat back down. The tension in the room broke. The neighbors in the gallery were whispering furiously, but the tone had shifted. I wasn't the monster anymore. I was the old builder who had followed the code, and Monica was the fool who had ignored the signs. Harrison Arthur whispered to me, a small smile playing on his lips. That was brilliant. The dark. The assumption of risk. You just turned their affair into a liability defense. I didn't smile. I just gripped my pen. It wasn't just a legal argument. It was the truth. They had lived in the dark for years, hiding their lies, hiding their theft. It was only fitting that the darkness was the thing that finally hurt them. I looked at Monica one last time. She wasn't looking at me. She was looking at the exit, realizing that the doors were closing in on her. She had come here to take my money. Now she was going to be lucky if she left with her freedom. Judge Thorne set the bottle down. The civil suit is dismissed with prejudice, she ruled. And in light of the new evidence regarding the text messages and the poisoning, I am ordering the bailiff to take Mrs. Burke into custody immediately pending a criminal investigation. The gavel banged. It sounded like the final nail being driven into a coffin. And as the bailiff moved towards Monica with a pair of handcuffs, I finally allowed myself to relax. The structure was sound. The foundation held, and the rats were finally caught. Dưới đây là phần kịch bản cuối cùng scene 13, và phần bài học rút ra được viết tiếp nối mạch, truyền tuân thủ nghiêm ngặt yêu cầu về giọng đọc AI, không tiêu đề, không ký tự, đặc biệt văn phong, từ sự đầy đủ cảm xúc và độ dài. Chapter 5. The gavel had barely settled when Audrey stepped forward again, her heels clicking on the floor, with the rhythm of a soldier marching into enemy territory. The civil suit was dead, but we weren't here just to kill a lawsuit. We were here to bury a conspiracy. Your Honor, Audrey said, her voice projecting to the back of the room. While the court has dismissed the liability claims, there is still the matter of the evidence that explains why the plaintiffs were desperate enough to ignore a warning label in the dark. We are not just talking about adultery. We are talking about the motive behind it. Sterling, Monica's lawyer, was frantically trying to stuff papers into his briefcase, looking like a captain trying to abandon a sinking ship. Your Honor, this hearing is concluded, he stammered. It is concluded when I say it is concluded, Judge Thorne snapped, her eyes fixed on Audrey. Ms. Burke, you mentioned text messages and poisoning earlier. I want to see them. Now. Audrey nodded and pressed a button on her laptop. The large screen in the courtroom flickered, replacing the image of the glue bottle with a high-resolution scan of a document. It was a mortgage deed. This, Your Honor, is a home equity line of credit taken out against my father's property 6 months ago, Audrey explained, using a laser pointer to circle the signature at the bottom. As you can see, the signature reads Harrison Burke. However, the notarization stamp belongs to a digital notary service that has no record of a video conference with my father. And the IP address used to sign this document traces back to an iPad registered to Mrs. Monica Burke. The gallery murmured. I watched Monica. She wasn't moving. She was frozen, her face a mask of porcelain terror. Audrey clicked the remote again. A bank statement appeared. And this is where the $500,000 went. It was transferred to a shell company, Summit Horizon, and then immediately used to pay off gambling debts held by Mr. Brett Daniels in Las Vegas and Atlantic City. Judge Thorne looked at Brett. He was sweating profusely, wiping his forehead with his sleeve. Mr. Daniels, the judge asked, her voice dangerously low. Do you have anything to say? I didn't know, Brett blurted out, his voice cracking. She told me it was her money. She said she had an inheritance. I didn't know she stole it. You lying snake, Monica hissed, turning on him. You told me they would break my legs if I didn't get the cash. Order, the judge shouted, banging the gavel. Ms. Burke, continue. Audrey took a deep breath. The fraud is substantial, Your Honor. But it was just the prelude. The reason they needed the money so quickly, and the reason they were celebrating in the car that night, is because they believed they were about to come into a much larger sum. She clicked the remote one last time. The screen filled with the text messages from the night of the accident. The ones I had read before, but now projected 10 feet tall, they looked like a billboard from hell. The entire courtroom read the words in silence. High-dose digoxin, ground up in his decanter. Make sure he drinks it all. I looked at the judge. I saw the blood drain from her face. She was a woman of the law accustomed to disputes and arguments, but this was raw, calculated evil. She read the line about the autopsy and the trust fund. She took off her glasses, her hand trembling slightly. "This is not a figure of speech, is it?" Judge Thorne whispered. "No, Your Honor." I spoke up from my seat. "I have the decanter in a sealed evidence bag in my lawyer's possession. We had it tested by an independent lab yesterday. It contains enough heart medication to kill a horse, let alone a man of 72. The judge looked at the bailiff. "Lock the doors," she commanded. "No one leaves this room." Sterling dropped his briefcase. He looked at Monica with pure horror, stepping away from her as if she were radioactive. "I am withdrawing as counsel, Your Honor. I cannot represent a client in a capital murder conspiracy." "I don't care what you do, Mr. Sterling," the judge said, standing up. "Bailiff, take Mrs. Burke and Mr. Daniels into custody immediately. I am referring this entire transcript to the district attorney's office with a recommendation for charges of attempted murder, grand larceny, and conspiracy." The courtroom erupted into chaos. The bailiff moved fast. He pulled Monica up from her chair. She screamed. It wasn't a scream of pain this time. It was a scream of rage. "You old fool," she yelled at me as the handcuffs clicked around her wrists. "You should have just died. You should have just drunk the damn scotch. Do you know how long I waited? Do you know how much I hate you?" I stood there watching her. I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel hate. I just felt a profound sense of pity. She was beautiful, she was young, and she had thrown it all away because she was too greedy to wait and too cruel to leave. "And you," Brett the bailiff said, grabbing the tennis instructor by his shirt. "Get up." Brett was crying now, sobbing like a child. "My hip," he whined. "My hip still hurts." "You will have plenty of time to rest in the infirmary," the bailiff said, dragging him toward the holding cell door. As they were led away, the neighbors in the gallery were silent. They looked at me with wide eyes. Mrs. Higgins looked like she wanted to apologize, but I didn't need her apology. I looked at the empty defense table, at the crumpled tissues, and the abandoned legal pad. It was over. The demolition was complete. The structure had been brought down, and the dust was finally settling. We walked out of the courthouse into the late afternoon sun. The light hit my face warm and real. It felt different than the air inside. It tasted clean. Reporters were starting to gather at the bottom of the steps, tipped off by the commotion, but I ignored them. I didn't want to be a headline. I just wanted to be a free man. Audrey put her arm around my shoulder. "We did it, Dad. It is really over." I took a deep breath, filling my lungs. I patted her hand. "Thank you, Audrey. I couldn't have laid the bricks without you." We walked to the parking lot. There, shining in the sun, was my Mustang. I had picked it up from the shop that morning. I had replaced the passenger seat with brand new leather. It didn't smell like vanilla or sweat or chemicals anymore. It smelled like fresh leather and possibility. I opened the passenger door for my daughter. "Hop in," I said. "I know a steakhouse downtown that serves a dry, aged ribeye that is older than your ex-boyfriend. I think we have earned a celebration." Audrey laughed, a genuine bright sound that I hadn't heard in years. She got in. I walked around to the driver's side and slid behind the wheel. I gripped the wood-grain steering wheel. It felt solid, grounded. I turned the key and the engine roared to life, a deep guttural growl of American muscle. It was a sound of power, a sound of endurance. As we pulled out of the lot, leaving the courthouse and the wreckage of my marriage in the rearview mirror, Audrey looked at me. "You know, Dad," she said softly, "most people would be broken by this. You lost your wife. You almost lost your house, you almost lost your life. How are you so calm? I shifted gears, merging onto the highway, feeling the car accelerate smoothly under my command. I looked at the road ahead, stretching out endlessly toward the horizon. Audrey, I said, a small smile touching my lips. In my line of work, you learn a hard lesson early on. Sometimes you pour a foundation, and you realize the mix was wrong, or the ground was unstable. You can try to patch it. You can try to shore it up with braces, but eventually the cracks will come back. And when they do, they will bring the whole house down on top of you. I paused, glancing at her. So you have to make a choice. You can live in a crumbling house and wait for the roof to cave in, or you can grab the sledgehammer and tear it down yourself. It is messy, it is loud, and it hurts like hell to destroy something you built. But once the debris is cleared, you have a clean lot. You have solid ground, and that is when you can start building something that will actually last. I looked back at the road. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of gold and violet. Monica was a bad foundation, I said. I had to demo her. Now the site is clear, and I have got the best foreman in the business sitting right next to me. Audrey smiled, resting her head on the new seat. Just don't use any more glue, okay? I chuckled. No promises. A good contractor always keeps his toolbox full. You never know when you might need to stick a few things together, or keep a few things apart. We drove into the city, two survivors in a vintage car, ready to eat a good meal and enjoy the quiet, beautiful sound of a life that finally belonged to us again. Life is a lot like a construction site. We spend years building relationships, careers, and reputations, assuming that the people standing next to us are part of the support structure. But sometimes, the people we trust the most are the termites eating away at the beams. My story isn't just about revenge. It is about the courage to inspect your own life. It is about realizing that when you find rot, you don't paint over it. You cut it out. It hurts to admit we were fooled. It hurts to tear down a marriage. But dignity is the only roof worth living under. Never let anyone make you feel like a guest in your own home, and never apologize for protecting what you built. If you enjoyed this story of justice served cold and sticky, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. It really helps me share these stories with more people who might need a wake-up call. And I want to hear from you in the comments. Have you ever discovered a betrayal that forced you to tear everything down and start over? How did you handle it? Let me know below. I read every comment. Until next time, keep your eyes open and keep your foundation strong.